Just yesterday there was a rally here at the UN Plaza, and it was the Uyghur People's Rally. And I know that 2 days from now, on March 12th, there is also going to be a Tibetan Women's Uprising Day rally. And I think all of these people who are going to be at these rallies, all of you, all the people who show up, they show up because they care about freedom. They show up because they care about human rights. And they do it voluntarily. No one is forcing them to do it. No one is paying them to do it. And most of you have seen, usually when the Chinese leader comes to town, you can have up to 2,000 Chinese welcomers, cheerleaders coming to welcome these leaders. And all of these people are actually paid to do that by the Chinese embassy and the consulate. So that shows how eventually in this battle, the people who care about freedom will win, because the people who serve the Chinese government, they don't do it because they care about the Chinese government. They don't do it because they are loyal to the Communist Party. They do it because they're paid to do it. They are forced to do it. So in the end, there's no doubt who is going to come out of this victorious. And I'm sure many of you have heard this disturbing news coming out of Tibet about the militarization of Tibet. How many troops and soldiers there are in the streets of Lhasa, in the streets of Ngaba, Kanze, whether you go to northeastern part of Tibet in Amdo, or southeastern in Kham, or central Tibet and western Tibet, wherever you go, every street corner, there are checkpoints, Chinese soldiers and troops interrogating people, rounding up young Tibetan males for no particular reason. Machine guns, tanks. And now we're hearing that in Lhasa, for example, many of these troops, they're not even dressed in their regular uniform. They're dressed up to be disguised as, in jogging suit, so that people can't tell that Lhasa is infested with these troop buildup. And one of those days, last week, somebody was saying that the same people that they saw the other day in a military uniform, now the exact same people are wearing monks' uniform, monks' robes. What does that show? It shows that the real monks in Tibet, around this anniversary, all the monasteries are locked up. The real monks are locked up in their own monasteries, and they're not being allowed to go anywhere outside. So the Chinese troops are standing in for these monks, pretending to be these monks, in order to fool the media who is there. And there was only a handful of media there to begin with. So of course there is cause for concern because of this intensification, intensified repression happening in Tibet. But underneath that, what it really shows is not that the Chinese government is exercising more control over Tibet. This intensified militarization and repression, all that shows is that China is losing control over Tibet. They have no control over Tibet. They have no control over East Turkestan. They have no legitimacy to rule these countries, and that's why they need millions of troops to maintain this appearance of control, this appearance of normalcy in these countries. And this is happening because Tibetans inside and outside Tibet, Tibetans around the world, and Tibetans in every part of Tibet have taken control into our own hands. Whether you look at Kanze, Lhasa, Ngaba, Golok, you will hear, if you know who to talk to, and if you know where to read these pieces of information, you will hear that Tibetans are taking action, maybe not on the streets, but Tibetans are taking action in their homes. Tibetans are making it difficult for the Chinese government to occupy Tibet. Tibetans are raising the cost of occupying Tibet. And that is the key. That is the strategy. And sometimes we hear from people that the Tibetan freedom struggle has no strategy. Whether those people are aware of the strategy or not, that's another matter. If they are not involved in the struggle, maybe they don't know what the strategy is. But the Tibetans ourselves, the Tibetans in Tibet, they are aware of the strategy. They are aware that what they are doing increases the political, economic, and social cost for the Chinese government to occupy Tibet, to maintain the control over Tibet. And that is the strategy. Every time a Tibetan in Tibet decides to use Tibetan instead of Chinese language, that person is raising the social cost on the Chinese government. Every time somebody types in Tibetan instead of Chinese, it makes it harder for the Chinese government to censor that information on the website, so that the Chinese government ends up spending more money into censorship. So that raises the economic cost of occupying Tibet. Every time somebody refuses to eat in a Chinese restaurant and goes to a Tibetan restaurant, every time somebody goes to a Tibetan shop instead of a Chinese shop, it raises the economic cost for the Chinese government. And in exile, every time somebody refuses to buy made in China product, you are raising the economic cost for the Chinese government. You are making it harder for the Chinese government to hold on to Tibet. And this morning, for example, when you wake up at 6:30 to be part of the rally in Cadman Plaza, I know not everybody woke up at 6:30. Some of you woke up at 10:30, for example. But no matter what the case, when you wake up, make an extra effort to be at the rally. It contributes to the movement. It adds to the political cost of the Chinese government for Tibet. It raises the and every little thing you do makes a difference. In Minnesota yesterday and in Portland the day before, the city governments issued Tibet Day proclamation in support of Tibetan freedom. And the Chinese consulates immediately sent people